But hello and welcome to everybody. This is the second night of a two-night event here at the LaPorte County Public Library, doing a community conversation about Belle Gunness, one of LaPorte County's most infamous residents, or former residents, as late residents tend to go. So yesterday we watched Bruce Johnson and Steve Rominski's film, The Gunness Mystery, which was a great way to prompt some questions and to learn a bit more about Belle Gunness. I will share a few links in a second, but first I wanted to introduce tonight's event, share a couple more events that we have coming up, and then I'll get started by introducing our panelists. So without further ado, some events that we have coming up here at the library. We have Brew School. That's going to be, I guess that's next week. That's a week from today. And for that one, you can go register for that class on the library's website. And then you can go to Owl's here in LaPorte and buy a sample six-pack with 6 different types of beers and learn about different types of beers and taste those. And we've got Indiana's top beer official, top tasting person. He's a Cicerone. He's going to tell us all about the different types of beers. And then you can wow your friends with different information and just always know about what's going on with this ale or whatever. Another event we have coming up is a Healthy You event. Healthy You is a health initiative that the LaPorte County Public Library has been doing with support from the Healthcare Foundation. In this class, you will get to check out a foam roller from the library and learn relaxing techniques to do some foam rolling. If you've never done foam rolling, it's fantastic. I really recommend it. And this is a great way to try that out and get some instruction on how to do that. Another event we have coming up is Walk with the Doc. That was the series that we did this summer that we're continuing into this fall with the Walk with the Doc Challenge the Kilimanjaro. So on this one, you walk the length of Kilimanjaro, which is 44 miles, and you do that in 2 weeks. And the people that are organizing this, the people that we're working with, are incredibly lenient. Like if you only wanted to walk 2 miles in 2 weeks, you could. And they count yard work as working on it. I'm really excited about this. If you do the 44 miles in 2 weeks, it ends up being about 3 miles a day or about 6,000 steps, which is super doable. And it's just a really good goal to just set for yourself and to get moving during the holiday season. So if you have any questions about that, you can look up events here on the LaPorte County Public Library's website. I'm going to add a link once we get going with the panel. So next up, we've got a review of yesterday's events. We had the Gunness Mystery. Bruce, do you want to say something really quick about the film that we saw yesterday?
About the film? Let's see. All I can say is how I brought it about. And first of all of my ancestors emigrated to LaPorte County from Sweden about the same time era that Belle Gunness emigrated to Chicago. And so I have some of my ancestors actually had connections with her. So I've known about this for a long time, not all the details, but because of those connections, I got really interested in from an early age. Being an Indiana history teacher for 25 years, I got involved in it as well as being a local history person. Also being on the board of directors for 35 years at the LaPorte County Historical Society and having access to all of our files that helped me out. And I want to make sure you understood that I had the 2 goals. One was to finally tell the true story of Belle Gunness with a visual presentation of actual photos from back then, and to raise money to get gravestones for Jenny Olson, Peter Gunness, the unidentified victims at Pine Lake Cemetery, and for Ray Lanthier's gravestone at Rossville Cemetery, which had been stolen many years ago.
Thank you. So that's a good segue into introducing our panel. So Bruce Johnson, of course, is a LaPorte native. Let me put this up here, where he's been teaching for 40 years. He's the president of the Historical Society. He's also served as a teacher in the Peace Corps and on the island of St. Vincent as a missionary teacher in Liberia. Bruce researched, wrote, and narrated the film The Gunness Mystery. He currently serves as president of the board of directors of the Porte County Historical Society. Steve Rominski will be joining us in just a few minutes. He attended the Tribeca Flashpoint Academy, where he focused on film post-production. In 2015, Steven set his sights on bringing the Gunness Mystery to the screen as a narrative. His short film Belle, starring Anne Hageman and Ryan Wolosinski, was filmed in LaPorte. As an editor and producer, Steven has had the chance to work on the nationally broadcast and Emmy-nominated Onward series for the University of Notre Dame, and has attended the last two Olympics as part of the team that provides content for the venue video boards. Most recently, Steven has shifted to working on UPM line production for feature films, including the award-winning The Good Catholic, available on Netflix, and 2019 SXSW selection, Miss White Light, both directed by Paul Schulberg, and as well as Monuments, currently directed by Jack C. Newell. The next two people we have joining us on the panel are from the Barker Mansion. Liam Madgers-Pershing is a Barker Mansion historical interpreter. She completed her BA in history at Indiana University South Bend with a minor in communications. Before coming to the Barker Mansion, Lillian worked at the History Museum in South Bend and at the Studebaker National Museum. And then last but not least, we've got Anna, whose bio just shifted on my page, is a Barker Mansion curatorial fellow and research historian. She is a specialist in the politics of identity and has a background in social history, social theory analysis, and gender studies. Anna earned her PhD in political science, as well as graduated with a certificate in women and gender studies at the University of Florida. Her publications include Troubled Motherhood, Interrogations of Maternity and Global Politics, published by Oxford University Press in 2020, and Repronormativity and the Reproduction of the Nation State, the State and Sexual Choice in the Journal of GLBT Family Studies, 2017. Before coming to the Barker Mansion this summer, she worked at the Matheson History Museum in Gainesville, Florida, and the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Her work considers the intersection of issues of gender and sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, class, and ability in relationship to nationalism, national identity construction, and nation building. So in just a few minutes, our panelists, or not even a few minutes, just a few seconds, our panelists are gonna introduce themselves again, give themselves a bit more of an introduction in their relationship to Belle Gunness and how they have become experts in this topic. But first I wanted to share a quote from one of the many books written about Belle Gunness. This one is from Janet L. Langlois. She was a folklore historian at the State University of Michigan, I believe. I don't have that in front of me. So she studied Belle Gunness as a folklore perspective, and just the idea of like what that meant for LaPorte and the process of LaPorte, like dealing with its identity as the place where Belle Gunness committed these atrocious murders. So in her introduction, she writes, and I have a sip of water first. In the face of Belle Gunness's inexplicable presence in their community, LaPorte has had to literally build her history, and with it their own, from the fragmented and contradictory evidence, talking together seems to have helped townspeople over the years to sort out elements of a baffling situation that would otherwise remain unintelligible to them. Faced with chaos, they have had to construct verbal images of their community's encounter with mass murder. Personal reminiscences, family stories, community legends, jokes, anecdotes, ballads, and plays have become finely honed tools in building up histories used in staving off the incomprehensible. Here, the distinction between history as documented fact and folklore as false or exaggerated information blurs the culturally framed attempt to construct reality. So with that, I'd like to turn the ball over to our panelists. We'll introduce ourselves in order that I introduced you just a second ago. So let me stop sharing my screen and I will hand it back to you, Bruce.
I'm not sure what else to say, except I I'm a native of LaPorte. I graduated from LaPorte High School. I have degrees from Ball State University in Education, Valparaiso University, my master's. I've done further graduate work at University of London, University of Paris, University of Moscow, University in Beijing Normal University in China, as all part of international education and further graduate work, postgraduate work. Otherwise, I've, like I said, I've taught in the Peace Corps in the West Indies and in Liberia and West Africa, and I've traveled to 116 countries. But that's all just information about me, not necessarily about the project here, but a little bit of extra. Hi, Steve.
Steve's here. Steve, we just started introductions. It would be your turn, but you might want to, do you want to go now or do you want to go last? You're also muted.
How about now? Can you hear me?
You're good. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, no, I can go now. Yeah, this has been a great project to be involved in for, I think, almost 10 years now. We've had since we first debuted it. And it's always just a great story to tell people. Like I was telling somebody about it today who'd never heard of it. And it was like, it's always almost jaw dropping to people when they hear the details. So yeah, I mean, it's been a great ride.
Thank you. So Lillian, you're up next.
I had to unmute myself. Hi, my name is Lillian Majors Pershing. I currently work at the Barker Mansion as a heritage interpreter. So essentially my job really is just to learn about history and the people who made history and how to present that in kind of everyday lingo that everyone will understand. And that's my main job. I'm a student at IUSB, majoring in history and communications. So I am from South Bend, and I've always had a fascination with true crime, probably at way too young an age. I was, I think, 10, and my parents probably were not that happy. So I've always been fascinated with that sort of history. And of course, because of that, got really interested in local true crime history. So I have lots of random knowledge about Gunness that I'm happy finally is coming into use. Most of my friends are sick and tired of hearing about her, so.
Perfect. We're glad to have you. And then Anna, you're up next.
Hi. So I am probably the only one who's not like a native of the area, but I think that's to my strength actually. So I've been living I'm from Chicago originally. Lived in Florida, working on my doctorate for the last 8 years. And then it was DC for a year and just recently moved to the area in July. So I had no idea who Belle Gunness was. And I think that's why I have an interest in how she's being portrayed. And I think I have an outsider's perspective. And I'm just fascinated by the fascination in her. And I have some ideas. I'm not sure if this is the time to talk about them, so you can stop me. But I have some theories, and I'm so curious to hear from the other panelists and anyone listening as to why we still talk about her. And I mean, obviously, she has done some really horrific things, but how is she any different from any other serial killer? And so I think it's her gender that makes us so fascinated. Right? She is a gross aberration, not only of her humanity, but of her womanhood. Should I keep going, or are we gonna circle back?
Yeah, I like
going.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to take any opportunity to talk about gender that I possibly can.
This is a great one for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, right? Okay. Because I'm telling you, when I first heard about her, I'm like, I don't get it. Why is everyone like, what is this fascination with her? So again, gross aberration, not only of humanity, but of her womanhood. And I watched Bruce's documentary, and I basically did this deep dive of any and all documentaries that I could find on her and any write-ups that I could find. And it seemed to me like there was a very consistent narrative that was being, that the way that she's been depicted. And firstly, it was like this, that she has these, like she's using her feminine wiles and she's very siren-like, and she's writing these letters to these guys and pulling them in, just like the mariners of old, right? And so we have this like initial, it's just such an off-putting idea. And you see this with female serial killers, and you see it in terms of any kind of female-led violence. And this is women who participate in genocide, torture, female suicide bombers. There's this huge literature, global literature on violent women. So I think that this follows. There are these very normative ideas within society of gender roles, right? A certain way that men and women are supposed to act. And if you don't act in those ways, then that is this, your mind is blown. There's like something wrong here. And there was this one quote that stuck out to me in one of the documentaries that I saw. And it asked, how could a woman who came from such an idyllic town commit such horror? And that so struck me, because why not a woman, and why not from that town? I think there's this presumption that if it couldn't have been her from that idyllic town in Norway, who could it have been? And that there is someone who could and maybe would commit murder because of what they look like, gender or race, or where they come from. Maybe there's a racialized conception of that, a classed conception of that. And so that just kept going through my mind in all the stuff that I was reading and viewing on her, in the way that she is portrayed. So maybe I'll just leave it there. There's just a lot of questions there, I think. And I'm curious to hear what other people think of my my outsider's perspective, so to speak.
Yeah, I can see Bruce's gears turning a little bit. But before we get too far into things, I just want to remind everybody who's watching and those who might have joined in the last few minutes, because this is also being streamed on Facebook and YouTube, as well as the library's website, that if you would like to add questions, if you are on Facebook, you can do so in the comment section on this video. If you're here on Zoom, you can add them either in the Q&A, you can add them in the chat, we'll find them. But yes, did any of you have a response to Anna's question?
Mostly musings, but we can find a question in there, I think. I guess, sorry, go ahead, Bruce. Yeah. Seems like you're gonna say something.
We'll never know why she did what she did, but there is a story in Norway that unfortunately is passing throughout the media, and so many other rumors. The one that's never been proven in Norway was that she had an affair with a local man who was in an upper class. She was, and supposedly she became pregnant, and they had a meeting later on, and he supposedly beat her up, and she lost the child, and then he mysteriously died after that. And so, well, there's no proof on any of that, but that story has traveled quite widely ever since it was first told. But I really don't believe any of that. And I really don't know why she has done what she did, but coming from her background as a poor farm girl, living on a farm that they really didn't know, they were just tenant farmers working on a wealthy owner's farm, and coming to the United States and land of opportunity. And once she came into money from the insurance that they got from when their little business caught on fire, supposedly she started it herself. But once she learned about insurance, I think that was really got her going, getting money from insurance. So that's just my thought.
I think your response is really interesting in context with the quote that I shared from the introduction of Gunness Lady Bluebeard, where the author talks about the connection of like the process that we make these myths up about her, like how she might have had that incident with the suitor when she was younger, as a way to justify her actions and her like ability to commit these crimes herself.
And you know what's interesting too is I used to study motherhood a lot, and the fact that she becomes this violent woman because her motherhood is taken away from her, either at that moment or indefinitely due to some kind of the violence that is long lasting. So isn't that fascinating that the violent woman is the non-mother or the anti-mother even?
Mm-hmm. But I think that also kind of brings up a good point when you talk about motherhood in relationship to Belle Gunness, because of course she does kill her children.
Right.
Her children.
Or whoever set the fire, yeah.
And True. We know for Allegedly. Sure that her first daughter, who she kind of got under weird circumstances, Jenny Olsen, she is flat out murdered by Belle Gunness. But I think it also brings up an interesting pathology within Belle Gunness and sort of my theory on her, where I think that she has a pathological need to rise up in life. She's so dirt poor in Norway. She was like called a nickname Paul's twig daughter because they had to scavenge for wood because they couldn't even have wood. And, they were really so poor. And I think that once she came to America, she really saw how there was this idea of the American dream and people could rise up in life and how impossible that really was during the time period. And she saw people as disposable, as ways that she could rise up in life. Once somebody had served their purpose in her life, I think she's a flat out narcissist. And once they served their purpose, she was done with them. Her first husband, Mads Sorensen, he served his purpose. Jenny Olsen served her purpose. Every single one of her victims who came to her farm served a purpose in her weird, twisted mind.
And to your point, that's a very interesting idea, because I feel like the way that, and I'm not sure if this is just true of Belle Gunness, but maybe the fact that she's a female serial killer is like, oh, she's crazy, she's psychotic. And just like what you were saying, actually, it sounds like she was pretty rational in her idea. I mean, she clearly could be a sociopath, but it wasn't this like rage-filled murder. It was like calculated. And I wonder if that gets lost sometimes in the way we think about her. I don't know.
I think so. I think that, and this might bring up to your point as to why people are still so obsessed with Belle Gunness, is because she's really not like any other female serial killer. Most female serial killers, at least it's believed, they don't derive pleasure from murdering. And most serial killers use poison, female serial killers. And Belle Gunness kind of flips that on her head by she like brutally murdered her victims. And we know that she chopped them up and she disposed of them in horrible ways. And that this really is almost an antithesis of what we understand of female serial killers.
Interesting.
And because, again, it's that idea of, how women are supposed to act versus how men are supposed to act. So I think that that's maybe one of the reasons why Belle Gunness has fascinated people for so long, is because she really flips everything that we think we know on its head.
Interesting.
One thing is that she, as far as we know, she was not able to have any children of her own. She never gave birth. There's no proof anywhere of any of these children who lived with her that they were ever hers by birth. But she wanted to have children, and she wanted to actually adopt her sister's daughter, Olga. And her sister said that, well, that was impossible. There was no way. And they didn't speak to each other for like 15 years after that. But she did get in children through the foster program. And I don't know how much money she got or if there was insurance involved with each child, but we do know that 2 of the children died under her care. But the really interesting is when I mentioned the insurance is that when her husband, Mads, had a life insurance policy, she felt it was not large enough. And so he had one for $3,500. She had him take another one out for $5,000. And of all things, she died on the one day the two policies overlapped. And so that's just really interesting because she really did have a lot of plans and she thought things out, and it just continued on from there.
I wonder if her desire for kids, like, when she talked with her sister, I wonder how performative that was. If she thought, oh, if I have kids, then people won't think, how could a mother possibly do all these things? And I wonder if that's why, if she couldn't have children, that's why she reached out, and that's why she was able to, procure these kids through the foster system. I don't know. Anyone have any ideas? Lily, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, especially, I don't want to diagnose anybody because I'm
Sure.
not a psychiatrist, but, I think when you look at Belle Gunness, you can very clearly see narcissistic tendencies. And when you look at somebody who has narcissism or is a narcissist, a lot of them view and use their own children for their own personal gain. And especially in the type of society that Belle Gunness is growing up in, the only thing that a woman really has in her life is family and motherhood. And to be a part of that normal society in that time period, she really needed that. But I really doubt that not to put words into Belle Gunness's mouth or anything, I don't think she really was motherly like. I can't imagine her being nurturing to her children. So I don't think that it was a nurturing thing that she wanted children. I think it was more of a status. It's just the way things were during that time. And she knew that they would be beneficial to her in one way or another. And of course, once they stopped being beneficial, she knew how to get rid of them.
I do think that she and Mads Sorensen actually adopted some of these children. The first two that died buried with the name of Sorensen. And then the other two girls, Myrtle and Lucy, in my research, I found that they were both baptized on Christmas Day, and they were already older. Usually, in tradition in the Scandinavian families, a child was baptized within 2 days of their birth. These were children who were a couple of years older already, and being baptized on Christmas Day just showed you that they must have adopted them, and after they were adopted, then they decided to baptize them. So they did have these two children. Whereas as Jenny Olsen, she took her in after Jenny's mother had passed away and her father could not take care of her. But all the years that Jenny lived on the farm with Belle, Jenny was perfectly happy. Her family actually wanted her to come back to Chicago and live with them. And she tried it for a few months or so in the summer, but really enjoyed it more so living on the farm in Porte. And lived for 16 years. But the great mystery is why, after all those years, would she do away with all of these children?
So for anybody who might have joined on the Facebook stream in the last few minutes, feel free to leave any comments or questions you might have in the comment section there on Facebook. And then again, for the people on Zoom, if you'd like to leave questions at any time, it doesn't need to be you don't need to wait or anything. We'll get to the questions when we get to them. But either in the chat or in the Q&A. So one of the ones that I'll be remiss if I don't ask is, what are some resources for educators at either the Historical Society or maybe at the Barker Mansion that educators could use?
About Belle Gunness particularly?
Not necessarily, but sure. Because I know you guys probably don't have too much.
I think we have zero, if I'm being honest.
You have to be really careful, especially going online. It is unbelievable how many people have put up their own websites and their own versions of the story. Because it is such a popular topic, serial killing, there's so much out there. I have seen and looked at so many things, and it's just so much misinformation. You've really got to be careful because I think they look at each other's and they just make their own version because they don't really do the research. Even the Guinness Book of World Records got in trouble because they had her listed up until the 1970s as the world's most prolific murderess. But they also had her parents as being, her father was a tightrope walker, her father was a gypsy sword swallower, and her mother was a tightrope walker, and that's ridiculous. All that information came from the original book back in 1908, right after the fire. It's ridiculous information, but the World Records was using it, and they got in trouble because it was misinformation, and they should be able to prove all of these things that have happened in their books. And they could not prove it. In fact, you still can't prove today that Gunness did what she did because we don't even know if she got away or if that was her body. There are too many mysteries. So they had to take it out of the book. But what I'm just trying to say is be careful out there. We do have several books at the museum. We have Schechter's book and we have Sylvia Shepard's book. Both have a lot of really good information and it's been researched, but you still have to be careful because in Schechter's book, for example, he has researched newspapers all over the country back at that time that this all took place, and where they got the information, I don't know. It's from coast to coast, so you've got a lot of it may not be true. So, but we do have those available. Besides, the film is available at the museum.
I think it's interesting, again, circling back to that idea of history versus folklore. So many people, like, they made up the idea of her father being a tightrope walker. Like, why do you suppose those ideas have so much currency? That people eat those up and people like to have those around and they last so long, and the idea that did Belle Gunness eat the bodies? Like, why do you suppose people cling to those stories rather than move on to the factual chronologies that we have available, like The Mistress of Murder Hill and the movie that you made and those other factual chronologies of what happened in her life?
People love horror, and I think they would really like those things to be true, even though they're not, so they don't let go of them. I don't know. That's my thought.
Yeah, that stuff sticks with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, I know that you were working on the Belle movie. I mentioned it in your introduction that that's a project you've had going on. Like, and then in the quote that I shared that you didn't get to see, it talks about how we make art like your film Belle, or frankly, I think when you look at some of the things we have going on the Porte, like the Belle Gunness Stout or the Belle Gunness Club at Indiana Deli, we make those as a way to cope with that history, but also it's a way to identify with that town. So it's interesting that, like, I don't know, just as somebody who's working on that project that you have going on, Steve, I think there's a question in there somewhere, but.
Yeah, I think it comes down to sort of kind of embracing the history or a part of your town or your story, or kind of, you know, generations have grown up with this story and it just fascinates people. And I compare it sort of to Roswell, New Mexico, where they have that shared history of a alleged UFO crash, and they kind of take it and run with it and kind of capitalize on it and make it a unique thing about their town. And I've always thought LaPorte could definitely do more with Belle Gunness on that. I know it's a very divided topic of sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want the town to be associated with it all, but most other people find it very interesting. And I think there's a way to respect the history of it and like have something that you can share with people without going over the top. That being said, it is interesting that, you know, the rumors persist forever, because I guess more or less it's fun to people to say that, she turned her victims into sausage and sold it back to the town, which there's no proof of that. That she was seen on the property unburying her cash or burying the head of the woman that she put in the fire, just like little tidbits like that. It's people like storytelling. People they like horror, like Bruce said. They like scary stories, and they like to share them with people.
That segues really well into a question that we have coming from the audience. Mike asks, I assume generally to the whole panel, but it seems to be more for Bruce and Steve. What are some of the most annoying falsehoods that you've heard about Belle Gunness?
One is that people thought that she married all these men who came to her. She was only married 2 times. To Matt Sorensen in Chicago, and then to Peter Gunness. All the rest of these men who came to visit her, she never married because they were only there for a week. Once she got their money, they were gone. So she did not marry all these people, but because over the years, that was one thing that everybody said, oh, she married all these guys. And that's not true.
Which is, again, another really good segue into a question. Did anybody else have a response to that before I move on to another question?
I think the sausage one is always persistent and always, or meat pies. I think they sort of do like a Sweeney Todd type thing with it too. It's just there's probably a few other little things like that always crop up that are just like, no, that's not really. I know it's like makes it a better story, but that's not really what happened.
Lily, I'm sure you've read some stuff over the years. Anything weird that is totally untrue?
I mean, I think that it's mostly the outrageousness of how she disposed of the bodies. Because I think that there's already her own murder is already in its own mythic proportions. And so I think that the most annoying thing is that people want to expand upon it when the root of it is already there. I think that what's there is fascinating enough on its own and not having to expand upon it.
Makes sense.
So another question we have coming in from Han is that the men were asked to bring cash and say nothing seemed pretty naive. Which segues into another question of why was Andrew's burial done in secrecy? So for the people who weren't able to watch the movie yesterday, Steve, could you shed some light on what happened with that burial, with Andrew's burial? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh no, that's fine. He was buried in the middle of the night. I think it was mostly to just not draw attention to it. Because of the impending circus that was kind of developing around finding all the bodies.
Yeah, because it was 10:30 at night, I believe you said, Bruce.
Right. Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think it was just to avoid a media frenzy at that time.
They didn't have flash photography. It would be the only way to, yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the crime scene became a tourist attraction, essentially. I mean, there are stories from up here in South Bend of people taking their wagons and down to or over to LaPorte just to see the Gunness farm, trek through and see if they could pick up a bone as a souvenir. So,
and in their Sunday best, no less, right?
Yeah.
That shocked me, Bruce, when I saw those photos. I was like, wow. Bizarre.
That's one of my favorite photos is that family all in these beautiful clothes, their Sunday clothes, posing out there on the farm. I just think it's fascinating. Yeah.
A person on Facebook shares the comment that her grandmother told her she was 11 when she got to see the bones carried away in the cart. Another question that I have, there was one more from that same person. Bruce, do you have any updates on the DNA since the film was made?
Unfortunately, for example, I was there when they dug up the female headless woman's body in Chicago. And they did get DNA from the femur bones of those legs. They were tested at the crime lab in Indianapolis, Indiana State Police Crime Lab. But the thing is, you have to have something to match it with, and that's been a problem. We let them use, we have a skull that was found in the outhouse on the farm, and we allowed Andy Simmons to get a piece of that skull, but it wasn't accurate enough. It just wasn't worth, didn't have enough value to it to be tested and compared. And then we also allowed one of the envelopes from one of the letters that she had sent to Andrew Helgeline, see if they could get DNA from where she would have left the envelope on the stamp, and again, it wasn't good enough. So the problem is not having anything to match. So I know Andy Simmons has worked on this for years and hoped that something would have been found out, but nothing has worked out. So I don't know that anything will ever happen. This is over 100 years ago.
And it wasn't her.
No. No, it's not her. She's not going to cut off her own head, and nobody else was going to do it. That's for sure. So
I kind of want to end on that question. We'll come back to that a bit. But another great segue, Bruce, about the question about DNA. Carrie asks in the Q&A, first she says that she enjoyed the movie last night, and then she asks, can you talk a bit about the process? It was very interesting how many relatives came to the gravestone dedication. Can you talk about the process of finding and inviting these relatives and their reaction?
This was back, of course, in 2008, and I wasn't so involved. It wasn't as easy doing the online stuff back then, so I was calling long distance all over the United States through the Gunness families, Helgeline families, Budsberg families, Olson families, trying to find living relatives. It was funny because when I was trying to call Gunness families, and I had explained why I was calling them, they said, well, we know we're not related, but this is really interesting. Can you keep telling us more about this? I said, no, I'm calling a long distance. But it was really fascinating to eventually find living relatives throughout the United States. I had already met the Helgeline family members years ago. They came to LaPorte to visit our museum, and so I had kept in touch with them. But to meet Olsons and Gunnesses and Budsbergs, that was really fascinating. And having them to come to LaPorte for the dedication of the gravestones I bought, it was probably one of the most satisfying experiences I've ever had, because those people came the night before, many of them, and I invited them out to my house for a little reception that evening, and they got to meet each other. Some of these people were related to each other, had never met each other before. And so I showed them my presentation, and back then, of course, it was still the slideshow, but they were so appreciative because throughout their lives, their parents, their grandparents, great-grandparents would not talk about these stories. They knew something bad happened to great uncle so-and-so or great-grandfather so-and-so, but they were never told the details. And they said this finally brought closure to them and their families. It was really an amazing experience. And then to have them the next day to be there to help me dedicate these stones, that was very, very special.
So another question I have, this one is specifically for Steve. It comes from Matt. Matt asks, what is your plan for the short film Belle you shot in LaPorte? Is it viewable or will it be? You're muted. There we go. Sorry.
It is. It is not viewable as of yet. It is finished. It's more or less kind of the idea with that is to use it as a pitch piece to hopefully develop it into something larger. But as with anyone who works in the film industry knows, it can be a bit of a process. So it just takes time and kind of getting the right people, getting it in front of the right people and getting, in the right position. it's a weird thing in that there's been many attempts to do some sort of project about Belle Gunness, feature film or series or otherwise. So it doesn't, you'd think it would be easier to do than not, but it just hasn't happened for anyone, really. So, but it's definitely something I'm still working on. It's just, I'm not trying to rush and do it hastily. I want to, if I'm going to do it, I want to be able to have the resources to do something appropriate, or something, as grand as it deserves.
So another question we have coming from the Q&A, although Anna, you unmuted, did you have something to add?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I unmute?
You're fine. Anyways,
I've been unmuted.
there's like this weird body language of muting and unmuting Zoom,
I wanted to add something about going along with what Steve said. I have been contacted by several people over the years who have wanted to make movies. Some of them have come here to LaPorte. I hosted one person from New York City who wanted to do movies. She came here twice and stayed with me for a week each time, hoping to do a motion picture on Belle Gunness. And that's been several years ago, and it still has not happened. Steve knows about one of the men from California who wanted to do a motion picture about it. But unfortunately, it costs millions of dollars to do these films. And Steve knows as well as anybody that there are many films made today that never make it to the big screen. And they go right to DVD. And so many times, some of these people I've met with, others too, have wanted to change the storyline. And the story itself is so fascinating. I'm glad in a way that they don't follow through, because I don't like the idea that they're changing the story and making it so it's not accurate.
So another question we have coming in the Q&A is, what originally drew you to the story of Belle Gunness? So I think all four of you will have a good answer for that. So let's go in some sort of order. Bruce, you're up on the screen biggest right now for me, so let's start with you.
Well, like I said, I've known a little bit about her as long as I can remember. I didn't know all the facts. I just knew the same rumors everybody else had heard over the years. But since I found out some of my ancestors have been involved in doing business with her, I got into it more deeply. And then once it was involved with the Historical Society and had access to so many valuable materials, and knowing that nobody ever followed through on these projects, like I had just talked about, I thought, okay, it's time that somebody does something. And so that's what really got me involved, to find out the really true facts and put a presentation together. She's just so fascinating. We have more people come to our museum to learn about her than anything else. We have the fabulous one of the best gun collections in the United States. We have the automobile collection of Dr. Kessling, but Belle Gunness, they come from all over the world to see what we have about Belle Gunness.
Jumping off of that, Bruce, do you want to say more about the exhibit you have at the museum?
Yeah, we've had an exhibit for several years. When we were in the other building in the courthouse annex since 1978, we had a little exhibit about Belle Gunness. And then we moved to the museum where we are now, next to the Door Prairie Barn. I expanded the exhibit, I redid it, I made it more user-friendly, where you can read the actual story with photos and documents to make it simplified and yet put in all the details. And we have a really cool exhibit. And maybe people have just come to see that and to learn the details about the story. So yeah, come to the museum and see our exhibit.
So Lily, let's ask you, what drew you to the story of Belle Gunness? And then sub question, have you gotten to see that really cool exhibit at the Historical Society?
Yeah, I actually have seen the exhibit. I've been to the LaPorte Historical Society a few times, not just for Belle Gunness, but yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with true crime, as I said before. I think what fascinates me most about it is trying to find a reason why people do these things, which will never, ever be figured out. I don't think that question will ever be answered. And, you know, obviously you first get into true crime, you find out all about the big hitters like, you know, Ted Bundy, the Zodiac Killer, and those are all well and fine, but then you kind of want to have some sort of closer connection. And I just, you know, obviously Googled Indiana serial killers, and she's normally the first one to pop up. And I think she's a fascinating study into the psychology behind those who kill.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Yes, and me trying to ask you if you wanted to
Me?
talk about
Yes.
how you got interested.
Yeah. So for me, I always have something to say. For me, as an outsider, I don't think I think I just come at it from a different point of view. For me, it's more about the narratives around Belle Gunness. For me, the last week, I've been kind of diving into all the media surrounding her. And so I'm more interested in this infamy that surrounds her, and how are these narratives written about her, and how does she work as a case study for us to understand the way that womanhood and just identity in general is utilized for us to understand pathology and deviance and these like societal aberrations. So for me, Bruce, not to put you on the spot, but I am fascinated by your fascination and all of our fascination with her. For me, it's almost like a meta thing. And again, coming from a place where I had never heard about her. For me, just being able to put the story together. And again, not just the murders, but like everything after that, and how she's remained as a really cornerstone part of LaPorte history. I just find that so fascinating. And that's the best part about local history. You just get these really interesting nuggets. And I think that can tell us something about ourselves and about our communities. And I don't know, it's interesting.
So to rephrase your question for Bruce, just what is it that drives you to find these facts and set the story straight?
Well,
am I saying that right, Anna?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, well, yeah, we can start there.
well, being a teacher and teaching history and wanting things to be factual, and all these years of hearing these rumors about Belle Gunness, and so many people saying, well, why doesn't somebody do this? And why doesn't somebody do that? And some people who did know about these people who didn't have any gravestones said, well, why doesn't somebody get gravestones for them? And finally, when it was the 100th anniversary, I think I mentioned before that I was at a board meeting on April of 2007, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, next year is the 100th anniversary. We ought to do something. So I mentioned to the board, I said, we should do something for the 100th anniversary of Belle Gunness's fire. And the board said, well, we're not doing anything. We don't want to commemorate that. And I said, but still, people are so fascinated by this whole story, and we need to do something. This put LaPorte on the map 100 years ago, worldwide. They were putting updates in the New York Times every day, how many bodies were being found. I said, this is really a major story, and we need to do something for the 100th anniversary before it passes by. They said, well, we're not doing anything. And finally, I said, okay, I'm doing something. And they said, well, you're on your own and keep it respectable. And I said, I can do that. So that's what I did. I wanted to finally be the one to tell the true story with a visual presentation and finally get gravestones for these people who had been forgotten. I even went to Patton Cemetery and I said, I would like to get gravestones for Jenny Olson and Peter Gunness. They've never had gravestones. I want them to be remembered. And they said, well, they're not buried here. And I said, well, I know they're buried there. I've done the research. I know exactly where they're buried. He said, oh, no, you're mistaken. I said, well, do you have something that shows where people are buried? They said, yeah, you want to borrow our book? So I did. I took it home and I found where Peter Gunness and Jenny Olson were buried. I went back to them and I said, here it says right here, Peter Gunness. And this says right here, Jenny Olson. They said, what? We didn't know that. And they were so excited. They said, oh my goodness, well, we'll do whatever we can to help you. We'll put in the bases for free. We'll clean up this whole area back here for you. And they were thrilled, but they didn't even know it. So anyway, I just wanted to finally do something that people said somebody should do, but nobody ever followed through on it. I wanted to finally tell the true story and get down the basic facts. And so when I had this all ready to go and offered it to groups in the community, schools, libraries, service organizations, historical societies, it just went like wildfire. And I'm carrying my projector and my screen and traveling all over the place and telling people. People wanted to know the true story. They didn't know what it was. It was 99 years later, and they still didn't know the whole story. So that's just what got me started. It's been a very rewarding.
Mm-hmm. So Bruce, I have Anna and I both have so many questions. I kind of want to throw this one in from the, and make sure you remember, you get to the next question, but I wanted to throw this one in from the Q&A right when you're talking about the burials in Oak Park. Paul wants to know, why were those remains taken to Oak Park for burial?
When Val Gunness's first husband died, Mad Sorensen, she bought a family plot at Forest Home Cemetery in Oak Park. And back then, when you bought a family plot, you had 2 rows of 4 spaces. Children died as infants. It was so common back then. And so you did buy a family plot. And of course, Alex Sorensen and Carolyn were the 2 children who died right away as infants and were buried in this family plot. And then Mads was buried there. And so she had this family plot. So then when she moved to LaPorte and got married to Peter Gunness later on, and within 5 days, his little girl, Jenny Gunness, died under Belle's care. She was buried in the family plot at
in Forest Park. Okay.
Yeah.
Forest Park. Oak Park had Forest Hill Cemetery.
Forest Home Cemetery. It's in Oak Park, Illinois.
There we go. And if they could, instead of Pine Lake, so if we need more tree references.
So she already had the plot. Okay.
So she owned the plot there. So Anna, what was your question?
Oh, I had a question about, maybe this is an oversimplification, but I assume that there are people in the Porte. It seems like to me like there's, and again, not to oversimplify, you can tell me if I'm wrong. There are like people who are like, ooh, this is interesting and intriguing. And then the other people who are like, this is terrible history. And I don't understand why we keep, we keep bringing this up. Like, is this is like
the board, like when the board was saying, no, we're not doing anything for.
Yes, exactly. So I'm curious if that's like a current in the community where it's like people who are like, wow, this is interesting. And then there's something to be learned here, and it's cool and interesting local history. And I get that. But then I'm curious about the other side and what, besides the obvious, like, obviously it's a abhorrent, like, history, and do we really need to think about that? But I'm curious what the anti-Bell people are like. What are their thoughts on all this?
Well, the thing is,
it's such a pity that Steve fell off right when it was the best question for him, because he was bringing
this up. I'm still here, just no video.
Oh, good. Okay, your video. Okay, please, Steve, take it away. I feel like you've got things to say on this. Like, what is up with the anti-Bell camp?
The thing is, our board of directors doesn't want to be known as the Bell Gunness Museum. We have a fantastic museum with so many wonderful things, AAA has rated as a gem in the state of Indiana. It's a very, very high reward. And they don't want to be remembered by Belle, so they didn't want the focus to be on her. They didn't want to do anything for her 100th anniversary. But
Lillian,
even our director at that time said, this is ridiculous. We're not going to do this. But they did allow me to use the materials. When it came to the day of the dedication of the gravestones, we had a police escort from the museum to go to the two cemeteries. We had 35 cars. We had hundreds of people, especially the guests from out of town, from all over the country, besides all the other people who are fascinated about Belle Gunness who came to this. Then we came back to the museum for this huge reception for the special guests who had come. And our director saw all these people coming in, the media from throughout the area, television stations, radio stations, newspaper reporters, and finally realized, thank you, Val, for bringing all these people here to the museum. It was a great experience.
awesome. So Lillian, I want to get back to Steve, but Lillian, you had this light bulb go off on the top of your head.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, we'll do Steve and then Lillian.
Sorry, what was the original question?
So what is up with the anti-Bell camp? Like, why do you believe people don't want to have, are so cautious about associating LaPorte with something that you said earlier could really be something that could be a boon for the town?
Well, I think I mean, it is gruesome, for sure. So I think it's a little, maybe it's too dark for some people to think like, you know, we want to shine a light on our city, but we want it to be something positive and inviting and less death oriented. But at the same time, I think more so people are more fascinated with that than anything. But I think that's what drives a lot of the people who don't like it. It just, they think it's not respectable, I think.
Lily, did you have something to say about that?
Yeah.
Like, you had this light bulb go off when Bruce said that we're not the Belle Gunness Museum, and it was like your career just laid itself out ahead of you.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think it's a very interesting thing that with a lot of small towns or small county museums, the idea of what do you focus on? Because as a small county museum or a small time museum, you have to think of the things that actually bring people in. And, you know, by focusing on Belle Gunness, I think that has brought in a lot of people to the LaPorte Museum. And, you know, just because they come for just that, you know, they also get to see, you know, the guns that you said you had, Bruce, and all the other wonderful exhibits at the museum. So I think that that's an interesting thing, that there's two sides to wanting to and not wanting to cover these big stories. But also I was thinking about how there's so many other, you know, small towns in the United States who have these horrific things happen in them, and how different places deal with crime and horror and gore, because it's something that, for whatever reason, humans have always been fascinated with since the beginning of time. Essentially, we're always fascinated with the worst things that human beings can do to one another. You know, like even just thinking of like Plainfield, Wisconsin, where Ed Gein is from, you know, like they had to basically like burn down his homestead because people would come there all the time. And, you know, even today, there's people who, you know, want to go down the road where Belle Gunness's farmstead was, and why we're so fascinated by it, and how do small towns deal with that? Do we focus in on it, or do we just shy away from it?
That's so fascinating. This reminds me of this conversation that you and I had privately about, that I'm going to now bring up, about societal trauma, and how do we as a community, as communities, deal with this stuff, and how it could seem as like just this macabre thing. But I wonder, the more I'm reading about this and the more I'm like ingesting a lot of this media, I'm wondering how much of this is like this group psychological processing.
Mhm.
And I don't know. What do you think about that, Lily? We've chatted about this conveniently
Yeah.
about our Halloween programming at the Barker Mansion, which unfortunately had to be canceled. This is how much thought
Right.
goes into all of our programming. We think about it in societal terms. But anyway.
Yeah, because the Halloween program we were going to do, we were talking about local folklore in Michigan City. And, I think Belle Gunness in her own right has become local folklore. Even though she was a real person who did real things, the legend kind of supersedes the real for most people. So, I think that is one of the answers as to why people are so fascinated with the worst atrocities in our cultures, is because it's almost a way for us to deal with the societal trauma within a town, within a country, is to just confront it head first.
Interesting.
Just as an example, I was at the museum yesterday, and a man came in, and after he walked around for a while, I said, well, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Illinois, and he was here working on the Rural King business there at the Maple Lane Mall in LaPorte. And he said when he saw that he was coming to LaPorte, Indiana, he said, oh my goodness, that's where Belle Gunness is from. And I thought, see, that's what we're known for, unfortunately. But because he had heard of LaPorte, Indiana, because of Belle Gunness, he was really curious. So he found out about our museum and came there. He bought the DVD, he bought the books, he bought Belle Gunness mugs, he bought Belle Gunness posters, he bought all kinds of Belle Gunness memorabilia. And but that's an example of how people, that was one of the first things they think of when they think of LaPorte, Indiana, unfortunately.
And one of the ways that Lily's future Belle Gunness Museum is going to draw in a crowd. She'll sell steins of Belle Gunness ale, and everybody's going to leave and get a Belle Gunness club from Indiana Deli. Are there other things locally, Steve or Bruce, that you can think of that would just are art that's named after her or made after her? Or
one interesting thing is that for the last couple of years, I've had bus loads coming from Norway, 40-some people in these gigantic buses coming to the United States. And one of their main destinations is to go to Chicago and come and spend the day in LaPorte. And then I would take them to the museum. We'd look at the film. We'd look at the Belle Gunness exhibit. They really didn't care about anything else in the museum. Then I would take them to the cemeteries and show them where Peter Gunness and Jenny Olson were buried. I would take them to Pine Lake Cemetery. And of course, they had to go by the property where Belle Gunness's house is. I said, and I tell everybody the same thing. I said, there's nothing there. The house burned down. All the buildings are gone. And there's nothing to see.
That's an interesting idea.
So I take this huge bus down McClung Road, trying to get it off the road and let these people get off the bus, are taking pictures, and they don't care what's there. They just want to say that they have been there to the spot, Other people.
That's an interesting idea of how, like, changing continuities. Like when we're studying history and when you're teaching students, Bruce, about what history is and just like how things change, but some things continue. So obviously the house burns down. There's nothing to see, but people continue to want to go there. So even right after, when they're digging up the bodies, people want to go there. And then the house burns down. These Norwegians come to visit. They want to go there. Another example of changing continuity that I think is really interesting is like Belle. I'm sure she wasn't the first person to lure somebody with a personal ad, but it was really strange when I moved to Montreal. It was right after Luca Magnato had done his murders. Yeah, Lily knows. So everybody was terrified of dating apps. Yeah. Like this guy, it was horrific. It was terrible. He just like found this one victim, not even a serial killer, like chopped off his head and sent it to the prime minister or something terrible while he like left for Berlin. There's a fantastic documentary on Netflix, and one of two things to reflect on with that is like the documentary ends with the person like breaking the fourth wall and looking at us. It's like, we make a spectacle. So are these people looking for a spectacle? Are we the reason that Luca Magnato committed this murder? Which is interesting to think about in a Belle context, because we don't think that's why she did it. But we also think she's a narcissist, which, yeah, would be why she did it. But then another direction to take that is, I don't know, we'll come back to that because it's much more interesting than the idea of just luring people with personal ads, because now there's always that idea, like, you're going to go meet a serial killer. Does that exist outside of Laporte? I mean, obviously it does, outside of Laporte and Montreal.
Could we also think too of like, there's power in money too. I think it was like, I don't know if she was a narcissist necessarily. Like maybe I'm more like, for me, it's like an Occam's razor thing. Like she grew up poor, extremely poor, right? Cotter's daughter, like had to be a servant, like, well, maybe that like irked her in like a very personal way, but it was a very much financially motivated. And thinking about the context of women, right, in that time period, you don't have a lot of power. So if you're able to, lure people in and get their money, I think there's also this really interesting, I don't even know, I don't know what to call it, a narrative, but from a lot of the media that I had watched, everyone comments on her size too. And so I wonder if there's like this, is there such a thing as like an anti, like the short man syndrome? It's probably such a stereotype. What is that called?
Napoleon
syndrome.
Yeah, like it's this reverse Napoleon syndrome because she's a woman. Women generally are smaller physically, but here's this woman who's larger. And then so she's just sort of taking on this power, especially if that story was true, that, she was assaulted by that man and potentially lost her fetus. I don't know. But, she's sort of reclaiming this power physically. I mean, thinking about these very physical murders and then the financial as well, like that to me is so rational and fascinating. And it's this power hungry thing. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think that almost every murder that Belle Gunness committed was about power. Most of them were financially beneficial to her. But I think that the few that weren't, for instance, Jenny Olsen,
right?
That was about power. Jenny Olsen was 16 and coming of an age where she could possibly be getting married, leaving the house. And there's rumors that she was going to be. There's also rumors that she was, going to tell people about what was going on in the house.
Right.
Because
clearly, could have been defensive.
Yeah. Clearly, I think people were suspicious of Belle Gunness. I read at one point that it was her mailman said that once a week, a man was coming to the house, and then he was gone, and then next week another man was coming to the house, and that there was rumors of there was a room in her house that was just full of men's clothing and suitcases and things like that. So I think that Belle kind of knew the jig was coming up, probably, and that she had to have control over her situation. So when she no longer had control over her situation, that's when the people who are no longer useful came to an end.
I think that's a really good segue. Yeah, Steve, you had something to say?
Well, yeah, we know that the pressure was on because Ashley Helgeline wasn't leaving her alone about Andrew Helgeline. So that was a big motivator, I believe, for her to kind of find an escape route, because he was not buying into the letters that she was sending back saying, oh, he just left, I don't know where he is.
Yeah, so we've got about 15 minutes left. We wanted to talk about how we don't think she died in the fire. And then I've got another question from Samantha that asks if there were similar stories. Samantha asks, if Belle wasn't in the fire, the rumor was she went to California. Were there any similar stories of men, foster children going missing out west that match Belle Gunness's description? Lily, I think you've got something, right? No?
I don't know.
I actually
really
can
don't
answer
know.
this. I know this answer. The one time, Bruce, you can tell me if I'm right, but I remember watching in one of the documentaries that Lily, you don't know this? I feel like you told me this. That so there was the rumor was that she was in California. There was a murder of a man and the murder, I guess, was similar to the way that she had disposed of people here in LaPorte.
It was the insurance thing, yeah, with like the first husband. Yeah.
Right. It was in LA, and they even had a photo of the woman, and supposedly it looked just like her sister. Maybe this isn't much of an answer, but it was.
No, but there's this guy that goes.
Yeah.
There's a Norwegian guy that goes around. I can't remember her name. Bruce, you know her name. The woman that isn't Belle Gunness. And this Norwegian guy has this whole presentation, and I really want him to do it at the library, and maybe that's going to come up soon. And how he knows that wasn't her.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Knut Erik Jensen is from Sølvå,
Yes.
Norway, which is the same town where Belle is from. He's a concert pianist, and he was based in Palm Springs, California, through the Norwegian consulate. And he was on a concert tour for a couple of years. And he is the one who decided to try to find out if Esther Carlson, this woman from California,
That's the woman,
if she was Belle Gunness, because that's been a big rumor for since 1930, I think. Anyway, he did tremendous amount of research and found that this woman she's never been to LaPorte. She had emigrated from Sweden. She was not a Norwegian. She emigrated from Sweden to Connecticut. She was married there. Her first husband died. She had lived in California and Arizona. No connection whatsoever to Belle Gunness. So that's been proven. And if you buy our DVD, Steve has the special, in this special edition, we have the interview with Knut Erik Jensen explaining the whole story. So,
I have a quick question jumping off of that. Changing continuity. So Norway was part of Sweden until 1905. So when somebody's passport says they came from Sweden, that includes Norway. How has that influenced your research?
Nothing. I don't know.
Okay.
I've never come across any of that have anything to do with my research. So all of her victims, as far as we know, originally came from Norway, because her ads were all in Norwegian newspapers.
Well, Norwegian wouldn't have separated as a language linguistically until afterwards. I studied in Sweden for a year, so I kind of have this odd, weird connections to this whole thing.
Swedes and Norwegians don't get along very well. No, they do today, but
they tease each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, they shifted their alphabet, and just the part of Norway that she was from had a closer accent to Sweden than it did to Oslo, excuse me. But it's neither here nor there. But it's interesting just to think that, we talk about this Norwegian serial killer who emigrated from what would have been Sweden, but then we do change her story to Norway, even though it wasn't. It's interesting. I don't know.
So
Anna's nationalism wheels are turning. But
I know. I'm like, ooh, and I actually, one of my case studies for my dissertation and my previous article was Sweden, and I'm trying to remember. I'll be honest, I don't think as Americans we can tell the difference, and I'm not.
No, we can't.
I'm not supposed to say that, but
they can't either, especially with a Bergen and a Stockholm accent. There's more similar than a Bergen.
I mean, right, but Bruce is right. There was this whole nationalist movement around that time period, even before that, where it was very much like a clashing, and it was for them, Norway and Sweden was very different, and
because Belle would have been going to the Swedish church in LaPorte, so that's another side of things. But
that's interesting.
That's complicating stuff. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We really wanted to talk about, did she do it? I mean, obviously she did. Did she escape? Did she get away with it? Was she Esther Carlson? Or
she was not Esther Carlson. We know that.
Was there any evidence with the, what was it like? Was it like teeth? Like, was a bridge or something?
Yeah, her dentures or whatever.
Her dentures?
Dr. Thornton made her false teeth, upper and lower false teeth. And he said if they could find them in the fire, then he could prove it was her. Well, they did find teeth. However, it took about a week, and the guy who was doing the sluicing through the ashes, witnesses said they saw him pull these teeth out of his vest pocket before he dropped them into the sluice. So right there.
About myth making again, yeah.
Yeah. So she may have taken them out ahead of time and given it to somebody, and I don't know. It's just, it didn't do anything. So.
You know, my question is, do we want her to have gotten away? If we're talking about myth making, if we're talking about narrative.
Yeah, I think it tells a better story.
Yes, it's more knowing that she got away. Yeah.
And, you know, I think it adds to the horror of the story. It's, you know, especially for at the time, it was she's still out there, you know. Nobody answer ads in a Norwegian newspaper.
I should probably tell you that back in 1930, they built, a man who lived 2 doors down the street on McClung Road bought the property where the house is located, and he built a house on that property. And when they cleared the land, by 1911, they had cleared it all off. The Rumley Corporation had bought the property, but they didn't use it. So he bought part of the property, and the original basement, the brick basement of Bell's house, had never been filled in. It was still there. So it was this hole in the ground, the brick basement, and this man who was going to build the house decided I might as well use the same basement. So he built a house. The house that's there today is built on the original basement of Bell Gunness's house.
Is that just economical, or
I think so.
Was there like an occult reason to do that?
Oh no, I just think it was, this was in 1930, remember? The Great Depression, so it was saving some money. But I have been in the house several times. I was there with a Norwegian film crew. They came to my house and stayed for a week doing a documentary film for Norwegian television. And so I went with these people out while they were filming at the house. And they were interviewing the lady who lived there. And she and her husband and her children had moved there a couple of years previously. And they were telling the stories. And then we went into the house and we went downstairs. And they're still filming. And she says, well, now let's move to this other corner. So we moved to a different corner of the basement, and instantly I got sick. I was nauseous. I was lightheaded. I felt like I was going to faint. I thought I was going to throw up. I thought I was going to pass out. And I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to interrupt the filming. And I just...
That adds to the filming.
Along with me, I don't...
Right?
Exciting. I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to pass out. And all of a sudden, like a switch, it was gone. Completely gone.
So was that...
And I stood there thinking, what happened to me? And then I'm thinking, oh, that's right. We're in the original basement of the house. And I'm starting looking around at the walls and seeing the brick walls and thinking, yes, this is the original basement of Belle's house. And I thought something really bad must have happened in this particular corner. I don't know what it was, but anyway, that was my big experience. I've never experienced anything like that before. I've heard stories of people having experiences, but I didn't believe any of it. But I do know that I got sick for a moment in the corner of the basement of Bell Gunness.
Was this the documentary where there's a small child and he's telling his mom that, or she's recounting these stories about how the kid talks about how, you know, there's ghosts, and they made a motocross in their backyard. Is that the same house?
Yes.
The Norwegian documentary.
Yeah,
right?
That's a great documentary.
That's the documentary.
It's up there with the makeup tutorial.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, when they were the ones who were staying at my house, and that day, after we did the filming, well, we went out to the car, and she said, were you feeling okay in the house? I said, no, something happened when I moved in that corner. And she says, well, I got sick too. And we went to my house that night. And she was so excited with all this filming and how well it went and this great interview. And her sound man was in the guest bedroom at my house. And he came out and he had this strange look on his face. And he said, the sound is gone. She says, what do you mean the sound is gone? He said, I've been playing it back. And the majority of the sound is gone. It's not there. And she said, well, what did you do? I didn't do anything. I do what I always do. And the sound is gone. So most of what they had filmed, they couldn't use.
Interesting. So we have two questions by way of conclusion. So first, if you're joining us on Zoom, it's going to launch a poll asking, did Belle get away with it? So everybody's going to have a chance to answer that right now. If you're watching on Facebook, feel free to throw in your 2 cents on Facebook in those comments. But then also, by way of conclusion and closing arguments, or whatever we want to call that, Mike is asking, if you could make Belle Gunness into a blockbuster Hollywood movie today, who would you like to see play the lead Belle and why? As well as any other just final statements you want to make. So Bruce, let's start with yours, and then we'll finish with Steve, because I know you've thought it through, Steve. You know who you want to play Belle. Maybe we should start with Steve then.
Go ahead, Steve.
It's actually a great question. I would probably lean towards finding someone a bit more obscure that could fit the sort of physical attributes. I have someone, I'm thinking of someone, a British actress who just won an Oscar a couple years ago. I cannot remember her name for the life of me.
She
but
in? We can guess.
The Favorite.
The Favorite. Oh.
She's in The Crown. She plays Queen Elizabeth.
Yes, yeah, she's in The Crown, the recent
I
Crown.
love her. What's her name?
She's
Obscure British actress. That is.
She's not obscure. If that's the same person.
No, well, she's not obscure now, but she was on Broadchurch and a lot of other shows.
that's
very good.
Oh my God, great show, Broadchurch.
I think it's like Olivia Colman or something.
That's it.
Yes.
She's incredible. That's a great answer.
It'd be great.
That's 3 votes for Elizabeth Coleman.
Olivia.
Yeah,
Olivia, excuse me.
Yeah.
One of the commenters on the Q&A, Carrie says Kathy Bates would be perfect, and I have to agree with that.
That's a good one.
It's always the number one comment. I think she's probably too old now to do it, but at a point, definitely.
Any other actresses before I show us the results of the poll?
One of the guys that had talked to me, and Steve knows this, that he wanted Angelina Jolie, and we thought, no.
That is, there's no wrong answers except that one.
I mean, physically speaking, isn't she supposed to be sort of like,
tall
and strong, and not that Angelina Jolie isn't, but she seems more on the petite side to me.
Also, there's so many of those sources that in the makeup tutorial, that video, if you guys haven't seen it, you just Google Belle Gunness makeup tutorial. I can't imagine there's more than one.
Is this Bailey?
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
She says Porte, and it's really funny.
I loved that. Yeah.
She's great.
She made a huge point that the person that would have to play Belle would have to be this most commanding, just like what she says is truth. And
I agree.
that would be the wrong one. Another Facebook commenter says that Helena Bonham Carter would be perfect. She's that's true. I mean, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
The tall, commanding Norwegian is not her, but yeah. Sarah Pullman plays all of these things, but she wouldn't fit.
Who's Sarah Pullman?
Am I getting that name right?
Oh, Sarah Paulson.
Paulson, excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah,
I could see that.
She's great, though. She is really great.
I could see that.
Yeah. I do think that, kind of like Steven said, if it ever does get made, I think it'll have to be kind of an unknown, kind of out of left field actress. But yeah.
I think I'd agree. Who knows?
So does anybody have any final thoughts or a closing statement they wanted to make in the last couple minutes? Anna, you said you always have something to say.
I know. I guess just like a quick rejoinder as to just thinking about all the different topics that we talked about. And our jumping off point was, Belle Gunness, this one woman, well, she's a serial killer who lived in a small town in Indiana. And I just think that it's so interesting and wonderful that we can talk about all these aspects of storytelling and narrative and identity and the stuff that you think isn't related, like motherhood and, societal trauma and societal grieving, thinking about how the tombstones, even after 100 years, was a big deal to relatives. So I guess, just thinking about how much we can learn about ourselves and our communities and about society from these seemingly easy and simple jumping off points, and how all of us came here with such a different perspective. And
not just the panelists, but like to break that fourth wall, but everybody us on Facebook, everybody on Zoom, we all came here, like we wanted to be scared. We wanted to have that. We're all sitting at home with our Belle Gunness Stout clubs, and we're looking for that little bit of terror. Yeah.
Exactly. So
it's frustrating for me because when I go on Facebook, there's so many different groups, Belle Gunness groups, and they keep asking the same questions all the time and coming up with the same misinformation all the time. And I get frustrated because I'm trying to set them straight, and it's never going to go away. There's always going to be this misinformation out there.
So I'm sharing the results of the poll. The fact of the matter is that Belle Gunness somewhere is dead and buried. Whether or not she's died in the fire, as the authorities say and as the facts say, or if the myths that we've created and the myths that we believe, she got away. We've got 6 people in our poll saying that she got away with it. She moved to California, and 1 person said no. So it's a fun way to reflect on that idea of like the facts say that Belle Gunness is dead, that she's dead. I mean, definitely. But,
yeah. Oh yeah.
The coroner's report says that she died in the fire in 1907, but we don't believe that. We don't believe that for a second. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight here on Zoom, on Facebook, watching on the library's website. I'd like to remind you that you can check out the website for more activities going on here at the library, both online and in person. I'm really excited about that beer class, and I just want to keep plugging it. The foam rolling class, that walking class, we've got a whole bunch of other really cool activities going on for all people of all types of ages. So just keep watching out for those. Thank you all again for joining us here on Facebook, Zoom, and thank you to all of our panelists. If we could all give them a socially distanced round of applause, that would be great.
Thanks for having us and for organizing this. It's fun. Local history, man.
Yeah, local history. What up?
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Speaking of the brew,